Doctors of Reddit, what happened when you diagnosed a Covid-19 denier with Covid-19? Didn't diagnose a denier, so not exactly this, but did have a patient refuse testing upon admission and aggressively yelling Covid is a hoax. I calmly said okay. Nurse, since we won't know his status, please admit him to the Covid floor. He became a believer in an instant and requested to be tested. Edit, for those getting their pants into a twist over this. I work in a major city in the USA, and across our health system hospitals, we do our level best to not admit an untested patient to tested negative floor. Such patients, exposed/refusing, are marked PUI, patient under investigation, and are admitted to another floor, with other PUIs. This floor also houses non-ICU tested Covid and patients. All patients are kept separate from each other still, in private rooms. Hopefully this makes better sense and ensures that the general public doesn't think we are placing all patients into a petri dish of coronavirus. So basically he never really doubted the virus and just thought his own risk of catching it was low, and fuck everyone else. I'm convinced this represents a large portion of the Covid denier population. My own father is like this. He says it's overblown and it's a lie, but what he really means is that he doesn't want to be inconvenienced by it because he's convinced that he is somehow immune to it and he is what truly matters. He thinks those who die from it deserve to die because they are the weak. They just kept denying they had it, stated they had something else, and tried to leave against medical advice while on high-flow nasal cannula, which we didn't let him do because he would have died within minutes. Before he was admitted to the hospital, he was symptomatic but refused to isolate at home. He gave it to his wife who ended up in the ICU. I just don't understand what these people get out of saying it's something else. If it's something else, wouldn't that mean they believe there's something terrible out there anyway? I don't know, it's stupid. I don't get it. Because that would mean that they were wrong. This mentality I don't get. If I'm mistaken about something, I very much want to be corrected. I want to know the truth. Doesn't matter what the topic is. Willingness to learn and change one's opinions in the face of evidence is the mark of an intelligent, mentally agile person. To them it's like someone telling them the oceans aren't blue. They look at it, and see it's blue. And when it changes color when a storm rolls in, they still think the water is blue, because that's what they saw first. So you just can't convince them the actual water isn't blue. They know the first thing they were taught, and that's it. When they dig in farther, and it become a part of who they are, who they hang out with, their social circle becomes the blue water believers. And admitting it isn't means losing a big chunk of who they are. Family members have come in with a sick family member and lied about exposure and or symptoms, despite a member's testing positive. This can has lead to inappropriate management, delay in treatment, and exposure of staff and other families. The family members then get angry when told to isolate. Reading some of these stories are wild. Even at the brink of death, people still refuse that Covid is real or that they have it. They would rather believe anything else, almost to a point that I feel a doctor could tell them they are dying of AIDS or some made-up disease and they go, "Oh see, I knew it wasn't Covid." Sir, you're dying from a brain cloud. The only way to cure it is to jump into a volcano. I knew it. Is that from the Tom Hanks movie, Joe and the Volcano, or something like that? Joe versus the volcano. Nad but an RN. I lost count of the number of patients I had who were Covid deniers, even right up until their last breath. During the peak in January, an average shift had me spend an hour or two being cussed out by patient family members that Covid was fake / we can't keep them from seeing their family member. Then I'd spend the shift sweating like I was in Kuwait, running around trying to keep everyone as comfortable as possible and maintaining their O2, and often repeatedly having to put someone's oxygen back on after they insisted they didn't need it. Multiple times I got told we had it all wrong, that it was just a cold, or that they weren't that sick and didn't need oxygen, even as they ran out of breath trying to get out a single word. Being in a super red rural area, it was to be expected. We even had Covid denying nurses for the longest time. Eventually they got the picture though and got with the program. Still, one of the worst that stuck with me wasn't the COVID denying patient. Patient believed in COVID and was a super great person. They were old though and had a caretaker. Caretaker didn't believe in COVID and was strictly anti-mask. Upon the caretaker being diagnosed with it, they refused to wear a mask or quarantine and said it was fake. They kept taking care of the person and never told them of the diagnosis. That person wound up getting COVID and being admitted to us. That is so fucking depressing. Fuck that caretaker. That should be a felony charge, Imo. That's reckless endangerment if the guy's lucky and manslaughter if he isn't. I don't understand how or why it is not. Kind of hard to charge someone when you're in a red state full of idiots that think COVID is fake. The US has turned into the movie I Doc Racy. I'm a doctor working in acute internal medicine. I've seen lots of COVID over the last 12 months, probably 300 plus cases. The one that sticks out in my mind the most was a 70-year-old lady with COPD. She refused to have a vaccine because she didn't trust it despite the fact she was eligible for one for weeks beforehand, in the UK. Subsequently caught COVID and was admitted to hospital. She repeatedly doubted this was the diagnosis. She refused to go to our COVID high dependency unit despite quite significant respiratory failure. Of course she deteriorated over a number of days to the point where she was on maximal oxygen on the ward and at that point finally accepted treatment in HDU with high flow oxygen, although continued to doubt she had COVID. Died within 24 hours of her HDU admission, having refused to go to ICU. And of course, what did her family say? They were convinced she never had COVID and even went as far as accusing us of withholding life-saving treatment from her. Unfortunately, there's no treatment for stupidity. I have treated a young male in our ICU with critical COVID-19 with severe diabetic ketoacidosis. He did not believe in insulin, yes, you are reading this right, or other anti-diabetics, even though insulin is inexpensive in our country. He tried to treat his type 2 diabetes with herbs, his HbA1c, the lab value showing the state of his diabetes on the longer run, was off the roof. He did not vaccinate, he was offered, did not wear a mask, did not distance, and did not believe in any of this corona bullshit. Most of this information was obtained from his 20-year-old daughter, as he was quite disoriented at presentation and was intubated urgently. She was sobbing through the phone every day for 1.5 months until he died. I held the phone with his daughter on call to his ears multiple times when he was still intubated, but his mind cleared up and his sedation was optimal. I was quite convinced that he realized his mistake on the ventilator, with lines and tubes inserted into his body everywhere and in his last clear moments, when his mind allowed, but I cannot be absolutely sure. I often think about the last conversation and last mental images people have before their death. I'm type 1. Getting COVID is a big fear of mine, and I assume many people's in this thread. Doctors and nurses have to defer to the patient for boluses, which I almost always have to force their hand, and make them contact my diabetes medical team. Being diabetic sucks, but not being in range is so much worse. The worst I've ever felt, for a long period of time, in my life was before diagnosis. My A1C was 11.5 mol, and I felt like someone was dragging me through mud with glass in it. Can't imagine DKA with COVID. I'm also a type 1, and I totally agree. Pre-diagnosis is essentially the closest experience to turning to stone I can imagine. I've explained having high blood sugar as having mud/glue flowing through your body too. Also, if you can, being a diabetic qualifies you for the vaccine in some countries now. I'm Canadian and got mine a week ago. Worth checking out. Stay strong, we diabetics gotta stick together. I wish. I'm also Canadian, but I'm under 30, and in Ontario. Good ol' doggy is shitting the bed. As an anesthesiologist, by the time someone's calling for us it's for intubation and the patient is in no condition to deny anything. Honestly, it's usually the family that's the issue and that needs to be escorted from the room. That boggles my mind. By that point they can see that their loved one is having trouble breathing, and they're still trying to keep them from being treated. Denial can be unbelievably powerful. If their worldview requires believing that COVID is a hoax, then some would rather die than admit their view of reality is a lie. I'm a family doc who mostly does outpatient. I live in a pretty conservative area with a good proportion of COVID deniers, so I've been seeing COVID deniers since this mess became politicized. I've lost a few patients over the mask mandate. Anyway, I'm pretty pleased to say that several of my COVID-denying patients have completely turned their attitude around when they, or a close family member, contracted COVID. Even if their case wasn't severe, the sudden terror that they could wind up on a ventilator overnight really puts the fear of God into people. Unfortunately, I still have some patients who are still pretty obnoxious despite their COVID diagnosis. They mostly dig in deeper into paranoia. If not about the virus itself, then about the circumstances surrounding them contracting it. If Fauci had done his job from the beginning, it never would have hit this town. It's the entire fault of Obamacare that I can't get the experimental immunoglobulin treatment. It's not. Your eligibility for the infusion is dependent on a list of risk factors, and, probably my favorite. So I have COVID and it's completely your responsibility to fix it. I need you to send hydroxychloroquine, zinc, VITD, lisinopril, and azithromycin to the pharmacy, then they proceed to get pissed at me when I don't. And yes, each of those things were actual things patients said to me after getting their diagnosis. I could probably think of more, but those were the most memorable ones. 12.8K. I'm a student, funeral director, and I see families go to the funeral of someone who died of COVID-19 and still deny it. They started out shrieking at the doctors to change the cause of death on the death certificate. Now FEMA is helping with funeral expenses for COVID deaths. Suddenly there's changes of heart. Physician here. The willful cognitive dissonance is real. It never ceases to amaze me how many patients will refuse assistance from me to register to get vaccinated, make claims that vaccines are harmful, but then accept my medical care on anything else that suits their whim. Patients absolutely have autonomy to refuse care, but why would you continue to see a physician and accept their medical advice and care if you think they would simultaneously recommend something to you that would be harmful? I've posed this question to patients who are vaccine hesitant: why would you let me manage your diabetes and hypertension if you think I would harm you by recommending vaccinations? You cannot get any kind of thoughtful response aside from, I just don't want to be vaccinated. Still had to treat her despite her accusing me of hiding the real diagnosis from her and doing something to make her sicker. Love my job. I can't fathom that people really believe that in a pandemic their likelihood of having COVID is so low that they accuse people of hiding a diagnosis. Makes no sense to me. To them there is no pandemic and COVID is a hoax and the doctors are trying to silence them. What do they really think is going on? Just out of nowhere, the entire world's supply of scientists and doctors got together to fake a virus so that they could do what, exactly? I've tried talking to COVID hoaxers and they just talk in circles. That's what I wonder. Do they think all the world's governments are in on it? Together? Why? Why? How? Governments can barely keep roads repaired. I'm an ODP and work alongside anesthetists in theaters and ICU. To be honest, I've not really seen anything from patients regarding outright denial. However, I have seen some of my friends on Facebook who have spouted all sorts of lies. That's really disappointing to say the least. One of them, a friend of my wife, works at the hospital. She works in admin and refuses to wear a mask and even bought some certificate off the net so she doesn't have to wear one in public. Anyway, that's being escalated up the chain of disciplinary action. If you have such a bad respiratory issue that you can't wear a mask, then maybe you should stay home. I swear these people piss me off so bad. I hope she gets appropriate punishment for her refusal. Absolutely, there is nothing at all wrong with her physically, she just doesn't believe in COVID. And this is someone who works in a hospital. Plain weird. My mom works at a big hospital in my country. There was a cardiologist who was very famous around that spent almost the entire pandemic denying the COVID at internet and was even invited to give interviews to conspiracy media outlets. He caught the virus and died of it, his family asked to hide the cause of his death. So sad. He should have immediately been fired and had his medical license revoked. Unfortunately, he wasn't the only one to do that. We have a serious problem with doctors giving harmful advice to the general public. Some even had their licenses revoked, but no one cares to do any real and based research about it.